The rain started while Margaret's coffin was being lowered, thin at first, just enough to darken the shoulders of black coats. Claire stood beside the folding chairs with her hands buried in her jacket pockets, watching mud gather around the cemetery workers' boots. People were already drifting toward their cars. Her mother had been sick for 2 years. By the end, grief had become logistical. Flights booked, hospice schedules, sympathy casseroles stacked in disposable trays. Even checked his watch before the service was even over. Claire noticed it because Margaret used to notice it too. He always looks like he has somewhere better to be. Her mother had whispered once from a hospital bed, not angry anymore, just tired. At the funeral home afterward, Evan gathered people into a private conference room with surprising confidence. "We should settle a few things now while everyone's here," he said. "Not remember, Mom. Not thank you for coming. Just business." Claire almost objected, but exhaustion had hollowed her out for months. Fighting required energy she didn't have anymore. Inside the room, Evan laid a leather folder on the table and sat beside a clean-cut attorney Claire had never seen before. The attorney introduced himself as Richard Hale and immediately began arranging papers into neat stacks. That was the moment something inside Claire tightened. No one hires a lawyer for after the funeral unless they've already rehearsed the conversation. Evan folded his hands, calm, prepared. "Mom transferred the house to me last spring," he said. "The car too. And I've already been added to the primary accounts to simplify estate management." Simplify? Claire stared at him, genuinely confused at first. "What are you talking about?" Evan slid papers across the table. "Signed forms, deeds, bank authorizations." "She wanted me handling things," he said evenly. "You were overwhelmed with caregiving already." The sentence landed harder than accusation would have, because part of it was true. Claire had been overwhelmed. She'd spent nights sleeping upright in hospital chairs, while Evan texted excuses from 2 states away. Work pressure, kids' schedules. Bad timing. Now he spoke like absence had been strategy. Around them, distant relatives shifted uncomfortably. One of Margaret's church friends quietly left the room. Claire looked down at the signatures. Her mother's handwriting looked shaky. "She wouldn't have done this without telling me." Evan exhaled through his nose. "Claire, you don't know every conversation Mom had." His lawyer finally spoke. "These transfers were completed legally." Legally. Still nobody was saying fairly. Claire's fingers moved instinctively toward the inside pocket of her jacket. The envelope had been there all day. She almost hadn't brought it. 6 months earlier, Margaret had handed it to her across the kitchen table without explanation. "If things become unpleasant after I'm gone," she'd said quietly, "give this to Daniel." Claire remembered laughing nervously at the time. "Mom, nobody's going to fight." Margaret didn't answer. She just looked out the window for a long moment before changing the subject. Now Claire understood that silence differently. The conference room door opened before she could speak. An older man stepped inside, rainwater still clinging to his coat sleeves. Daniel Mercer, Margaret's attorney for almost 20 years. He looked directly at Claire first. "I'm sorry I'm late." Not to Evan, to Claire. Something subtle changed in the room immediately. Richard Hale straightened in his chair. Evan's confidence flickered, barely noticeable unless you knew him well. Daniel set his briefcase down carefully. "I understand documents have already been presented." Evan nodded. "Everything was finalized months ago." "Submitted already?" "Yes." Daniel was quiet for a second too long, then Claire removed the envelope from her jacket and slid it across the table. "I think this is why Mom wanted you here." Daniel opened it slowly. Inside was a revised estate directive, notarized 6 months earlier. A second packet followed, medical evaluations, witness statements, dated notes in Margaret's handwriting. Richard Hale began reading faster, then slower. The room lost its earlier certainty. Daniel adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Whitaker requested independent review regarding competency concerns connected to prior transfers," he said calmly. "This revision places all major assets into a family trust pending probate examination." Evan blinked. "What competency concerns?" Daniel looked at him for the first time. "Your mother documented periods where she felt pressured while medicated." Nobody moved. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Claire watched Evan's face carefully. She expected anger, denial, maybe shouting. Instead, he looked stunned, not because he'd lost the house. Because their mother had anticipated this. Daniel continued gently, almost regretfully. "She did not remove either of you as beneficiaries. But she was very clear about one thing." He unfolded a handwritten page. "I no longer trust my children to behave like family when I am gone." No one spoke after that, not even the lawyers, especially not the lawyers. The meeting dissolved into procedural language eventually. Probate review, temporary freezes, examination timelines, practical consequences. But Claire barely heard them. All she could think about was her mother sitting alone at that kitchen table, preparing paperwork against her own children while pretending everything was normal. When the room finally emptied, Evan lingered near the doorway. For the first time all afternoon, he looked uncertain. "You knew?" he asked quietly. Claire shook her head. "No." And somehow he believed her immediately. 3 days later, Claire returned to Margaret's house alone. Everything inside was labeled, bills sorted by month. appliance manuals clipped together, sticky notes explaining which plants needed indirect sunlight, evidence of a woman trying desperately to leave behind order because she expected chaos. Claire sat at the kitchen table until evening, light faded gray across the counters. Outside, headlights slowed near the driveway, Evan's car. For a moment, she thought he might come inside. Instead, the engine idled briefly before pulling away again without a knock at the door. Claire watched the empty driveway long after the taillights disappeared. The silence he left behind felt strangely familiar, like inheritance.